The temperature on the dashboard read 19 degrees, and the woman behind the wheel had stopped feeling her toes 20 minutes earlier. Her name was Simone Okafor, and she was sitting in a dead Honda on the shoulder of County Road 9, watching headlights crest the hill behind her, swell against her mirrors, and then sweep past without slowing. The 8th car since midnight. She had counted them the way she once counted breaths over a wounded body, methodically, because counting kept the panic in its box. She had her hazards on, she had the dome light on, so anyone looking would see a person and not a threat. She had pulled her wool coat tight and tucked her hands under her arms, and she had done all of this while a wind off the cornfields found every seam in the door and slid in cold as river water. 19 degrees, 2 in the morning. 40 miles from the nearest town she knew the name of. The 9th car came over the hill, slowed almost enough to matter, and the driver's window stayed up while the face inside studied her for the length of one breath. Then the car accelerated. She watched its taillights shrink to 2 red pinpricks and vanish, and she understood with a clarity that did not surprise her that nobody on this road tonight was going to stop for the woman they saw when they looked at her. So she did the only thing left. She started looking for a house. To understand why a boy with a flashlight changed everything, you have to go back about 9 hours to a hospital parking garage 300 miles south, where Simone signed her discharge papers and walked out of a job she had loved for 11 years. Simona Okafor was 41 years old. She had spent 8 of those years in the army, the last 4 as a flight nurse on a medevac crew, which meant she had learned trauma medicine, not in a classroom but at altitude, with a patient bleeding under her hands and the floor of the helicopter tilting, and the noise so total that she read lips and hand signals because shouting was useless. She had brought people back from edges most nurses never see. She had also, twice, failed to. And she carried those two the way you carry a stone in a coat pocket, always aware of the weight, never able to set it down. At the army she had gone to work in the trauma bay of a county hospital, and for 11 years she had been the steady one, the nurse the residents looked at when a code went sideways and they needed someone to tell them, calmly, what to do next. She was good. Everyone who worked beside her knew she was good. The problem was that the people who decided things had mostly never worked beside her. The hospital had been bought that spring by a management company 3 states away, and the management company had a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet did not have a column. For the night Simone held the teenager's femoral artery closed with 2 fingers for 19 minutes until the surgeon scrubbed in. It had a column for her salary, and her salary was high, because experience costs money, and so when the reorganization came down, Simone's position was one of the ones they decided to eliminate. They called it a restructuring. They gave her a folder and a handshake and a date. She did not argue. She had learned a long time ago that arguing with a spreadsheet is like arguing with weather. So she packed 11 years into one cardboard box, and the box held less than she expected, and she drove out of the parking garage at 5 in the afternoon with the box on the passenger seat and no clear idea of where she was going except north, toward the small town where her grandmother had lived and died, where there was an empty house with Simone's name on the deed now and a porch she remembered sitting on as a girl. She had thought she would make it before midnight. She had not counted on the cold snap, or the way the old Honda's battery had been dying by degrees for months, or the fact that a car will run fine for 300 miles and then quit the instant you turn it off at a gas station to buy coffee and stretch your legs. She had turned the key and the engine had given her 1 click and then nothing, and the gas station had been closed, its single attendant gone home, its lights on a timer that snapped off. At 1, she had managed to coast back onto the road and let momentum carry the dead car onto the shoulder before it rolled to a stop. And there she had sat, and the cars had come, and the cars had gone. Her phone had 9% battery and no signal. She had walked 100 yards in each direction, holding it overhead like an offering, and got nothing. The cold made decisions for her the longer she stayed still, so she made one of her own. Across a fallow field, maybe a quarter mile off the road, a single yellow light burned in the upstairs window of a farmhouse. She wrote a note and left it on the dash in case anyone official ever came looking, locked the car and started walking toward the light. The field was frozen stubble, and it crunched under her boots, and the wind came at her sideways, and she kept the light fixed in front of her, the way she had once kept a landing zone fixed through a dark windshield. Halfway across, she stopped, because the light in the window had started moving. It came down through the house, window to window, the way a light does when someone is carrying it down a staircase. Then it crossed the dark ground floor. Then a door opened at the back of the house, throwing a brief rectangle of warmth onto a porch, and a small figure stepped out into the cold, holding the light in front of him with both hands. He could not have been more than 10. He was wearing a coat thrown over pajamas and rubber boots with the laces undone, and he was holding a heavy black flashlight, the kind with a handle, the kind kept by a back door for emergencies. He raised it and pointed the beam out across the field, sweeping it slowly, and when it found Simone, she lifted one hand into the light so he could see she was a person and not a shadow. The boy did not run. He did not shout for an adult. He held the beam steady on the ground 6 feet in front of her, lighting her path so she would not turn an ankle in the furrows, and he waited for her to come to him. When she reached the edge of the porch, he tilted the flashlight up just enough to see her face and then back down, fast, because his grandfather had taught him, you do not shine a light in a person's eyes. "Your car broke," the boy said. It was not a question. "It did," Simone said. "I'm sorry to come up on your house this late. My phone's dead and nobody would stop." "People don't stop on 9 at night," the boy said, with the flat certainty of a child reporting a fact about the world. "Grandpa says it's because they're scared, and being scared makes people no good to anybody." He stepped back and held the door. "You're cold. Come in by the stove. I'll get him." His name was Eli. He was 9, he told her, and 3/4, and he lived with his grandfather because his mother worked nights at a distribution center 2 counties over and slept days. The grandfather was named Walt Bricker, and Walt came down the stairs slow, one hand on the rail, a flannel robe over a flannel shirt, white hair standing up in tufts, squinting at the stranger his grandson had let in at 2 in the morning. He did not squint long. He took one look at Simone, standing by the wood stove with her hands out toward the heat, at the exhaustion on her, at the cardboard box she did not have because it was still in the car, but at the something in her bearing that told him this was a person who had been somewhere and survived it, and he said, "Eli, put the kettle on." That was the whole of his suspicion. A kettle. Walt Bricker was 78. He had farmed 400 acres of corn and soybeans for 50 years, and now leased most of it out and kept 12 acres for himself, a garden, a stand of walnut trees, and the house his own father had built. He had buried a wife and an adult son, Eli's father, and he carried his grief the way some old men do, folded small and tucked away, taking it out only at night when no one could see. He poured Simone a cup of tea with hands that shook slightly, an old man's tremor, and he listened to her story without interrupting, and when she got to the part about the cars that would not stop, his jaw tightened and he said one thing. "That's a shame on every one of them, not on you." She had not known how much she needed to hear that until she heard it. A decade of a hospital and a spreadsheet and 8 cars and a deputy she had not even met yet, all of it pressing down, and an old farmer in a flannel robe had set the weight where it belonged in 9 words. She drank the tea. Her hands stopped shaking before his did. They could not get the car started that night. Walt had jumper cables, but his truck was an ancient diesel with a charging system that did not want to talk to a small foreign battery in 19-degree cold, and after 20 minutes in the field with the hood up and the breath freezing on their faces, he waved it off. "Morning," he said. "Battery's flat as a flounder, and so are we. You'll take Eli's room. He'll bunk with me." "No argument. You'll lose." She did not argue. She slept in a child's bed under a quilt that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and for the first time in 3 days the stone in her coat pocket felt a little lighter, and she did not understand why a stranger's kindness should do what all those years of being right could not. She woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of a boy narrating cartoons to himself in another room, and to a kind of light through the curtains she had not seen in a long time, the low gold light of a winter morning in open country with frost on every blade of grass. She lay still for a moment and let it be Saturday, let it be her grandmother's house. Let it be a morning with nothing required of her. Then she got up, because that is who she was. Walt drove her into the nearest town, a place called Harlow Bend, in the diesel truck that idled like a tractor and smelled of straw and motor oil, with Eli wedged between them, narrating the whole way. The town was one stoplight and a feed store and a diner and a volunteer fire station and a hardware store that sold car batteries, and it was at the hardware store that Simone met the first person in this town who looked at her the way the cars on the road had looked at her. His name was on a brass tag pinned crooked to a fleece vest, and the tag said, Garrett Pruitt. And he was the man behind the counter, and he was also, Simone would learn, a county deputy who worked the hardware store on his days off and ran the volunteer fire department's first response rig as a side authority he enjoyed more than the badge. He was 53, broad through the middle, with a grey mustache, and the manner of a man who had been the most important person in a small place for so long that he had forgotten there were larger places. When Walt said they needed a battery for a 2009 Honda, Garrett looked past Walt at Simone, and something settled behind his eyes, some quiet sorting, and he said, She the one broke down on 9 last night. Dispatch had a car called in. We don't tow strangers' vehicles off the county road, ma'am. They sit till the owner deals with them. Liability. I'm the owner, Simone said. I'm dealing with it. You got a receipt for that vehicle. It's at the car, with the registration in my name. Garrett let a silence sit, the kind of silence that is a sentence all its own. We'll see, he said, and he sold Walt the battery, and he charged Walt the full price, plus what he called a county handling fee that did not appear on any sign, and he did all of it while looking at Simone as though she were a problem he had not yet decided how to file. Walt paid without a word, but his jaw was tight again, and in the truck, on the way back, he said, Garrett Pruitt has been wrong about people his whole life and never once paid for it. Don't let him into your head. But he was in her head. That was the thing about men like Garrett. They did not need to do much. A look did the work. A handling fee did the work. The certainty that you were a problem to be filed did the work. They put the new battery in the Honda, and it started on the first turn of the key, and Simone sat in the warm car with the heater finally running and thought about driving the last 40 miles to her grandmother's house and never coming back to Harlow Bend again. She had every reason to. The town had shown her its hand. Eli, though, was standing in the field by the open car door, and he said, You're going to come back, though, right? Didn't see the walnut trees yet. Grandpa's got the best ones in the county. And she found she could not drive away from the boy who had come out into the cold with a flashlight when grown men in warm cars would not roll down a window. So she stayed the weekend. The weekend changed both their lives. Her grandmother's house, when she finally drove out to see it, was 12 miles past Harlow Bend on a gravel road, and it was sound but tired, a roof that needed work and a porch that sagged and a garden gone to weed, and standing in it Simone felt the full strangeness of her situation. No job, a box of a whole career in the trunk, a dead grandmother's house and a town that did not want her, and a 9-year-old who did. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, and she made a decision that surprised her. She would not run. She would fix the porch first. A person who runs has to keep running. She was tired of running. On Sunday afternoon, in Walt Bricker's kitchen, the thing happened that would change everything, and it happened while Simone was there, helping Eli shell walnuts into a steel bowl. Walt had gone quiet. He was sitting at the kitchen table. He had set down his coffee, and he was rubbing his left arm in a slow, absent way, and his colour had gone the grey of old putty. Simone saw it the way she saw everything, all at once and without thinking, the rubbed arm and the grey colour and the sudden sheen of sweat on a cold day and the way his breathing had gone shallow and fast. She was across the kitchen and kneeling in front of him before Eli had even looked up from the walnuts. Walt, look at me. Are you having chest pain? Indigestion, he said. His voice was wrong. His hand went to the centre of his chest, and that was all she needed. What happened next happened in a small farmhouse kitchen 12 miles from the nearest help, and it happened in the hands of a woman whose job had been eliminated by a spreadsheet that had no column for any of it. L.I., Simone said, and her voice was the voice from the helicopter, calm and total and impossible to argue with. Go to the phone on the wall, dial 911. Tell them your grandfather is having a heart attack and you need the ambulance at the Bricker Farm on Route 4. Say it twice. Then come back and tell me exactly what they said. Go now." The boy went. He did not cry and he did not freeze. He went to the phone and dialed, and Simone heard his small, clear voice saying the words she had given him. Twice, exactly, and something in her chest moved at the steadiness of him. This child who came out into the cold with a flashlight. This child who did not panic. And she filed it away to feel later, because right now, Walt was sliding sideways in the chair. She got him to the floor. She knew the floor was where this would happen if it was going to happen, and she wanted him flat and on a hard surface before it did, not slumped in a chair where she could do nothing. She had no aspirin in reach, and she did not waste a breath. She put her ear to his mouth and her hand on his chest, and she counted, and at the count where his breathing should have come, it did not come, and his chest under her hand went still, and she did not hesitate for even the length of a thought. She laced her fingers, set the heel of her hand on the center of his sternum, locked her elbows and drove down. Hard, 2 inches, the way you have to, harder than people think, hard enough that she felt the cartilage give the way it always does and that you have to ignore. She counted aloud, not for him, for the rhythm. 30 compressions at the tempo of an old song she used in her head, and then 2 breaths, and then 30 again. Eli came back into the kitchen and stood in the doorway, and she did not look up. She said, "They're coming?" And he said, 11 minutes, in a voice gone small. And she said, "Then I'm his heart for 11 minutes. Get me the kitchen towel and put it under his head. You're helping me. You're doing good." 11 minutes is a very long time to be another person's heart. It is longer than it sounds. Her shoulders burned by the 3rd minute and screamed by the 6th, and she stopped feeling them by the 9th, the way she had stopped feeling her toes in the dead car the night before. And she kept the tempo 30 and 2, 30 and 2, and she talked to Walt the whole time in a low, steady stream. Because she had learned that the last sense to go and the first to come back is hearing, and she would not have him alone in that closing dark even for a second. "Stay with me, Walt. You've got walnut trees to show me. You've got that boy. You don't get to leave him. Stay with me." And Eli knelt by his grandfather's head with the towel under it and held the old man's grey hand in both of his small ones and did not let go. The ambulance came up the gravel road with its lights turning, and Simone heard it before Eli did, and she said, "That's them. Open the door wide, prop it with the boot, then stand back by the wall so they have room." And the boy did exactly that, and 2 paramedics came through the door with a bag and a monitor, and the lead paramedic, a young woman with her hair in a tight braid, took one look at the scene, a stranger doing flawless compressions on the kitchen floor with a child's towel under the patient's head. And she did not ask any of the questions paramedics usually have to ask. She knelt and slapped the pads on Walt's bare chest and said, "How long has he been down?" And Simone said, without breaking her tempo, "Approximately 4 minutes of compressions, witnessed arrest, no shock delivered, no meds on scene," in the clipped, complete language of a person who had handed off 100 patients at altitude. And the paramedic's eyes came up to her face for one quick assessing second and changed. "On my count, you're off, and I'm on," the paramedic said. 3, 2, 1. And Simone lifted her hands and sat back on her heels and let her arms fall and watched the monitor, and the line on the monitor was not flat, it was the chaotic scribble of a heart trying to find itself, and the paramedic said the word Simone had been praying to hear, "shockable," and charged the unit and said "clear," and everyone was clear. And Walt Bricker's body jumped on the floor of his own kitchen, and the scribble on the monitor staggered and steadied and became a rhythm, a real rhythm. Slow and rough and irregular, but a rhythm, a heart beating on its own. The paramedic exhaled and looked at Simone over the body of the old man and said quietly, "You kept him alive, whoever you are. You kept his brain perfused for 4 minutes, and you handed me a shockable rhythm. He'd be gone if you weren't standing here." And then they had Walt on the gurney and out the door, and the second paramedic said to Simone, "Ride with us. We're going to need his history and you're the only one who knows what happened." And Simone scooped Eli up onto her hip, a 9-year-old, too big to be carried, but carried anyway. And she climbed into the back of the ambulance, and they ran lights all the way to the county hospital. 22 miles off, Walt Bricker lived. He had a stent placed in an artery that the cardiologist said had been 95% closed, a widowmaker, the kind that gives no warning and no second chance, and the cardiologist, a tired man near the end of a long shift, came out to the waiting room and found a black woman with a sleeping boy across her lap, and he said, "Are you family?" And Eli woke up and said, fiercely, before Simone could answer, "She's the one who saved him." And the cardiologist looked at Simone with new attention and said, "The compressions in the field, that was you." And she said it was, and he sat down across from her, which doctors near the end of long shifts do not do for nothing, and he said, "Where did you learn to do what you did?" "I was a flight nurse," she said. "Medevac, 8 years. Then trauma. Then," he said, and stopped, because he was a smart man and he understood that the word was doing a lot of work in those sentences. "You're not working now." "My position was eliminated," she said. 3 days ago, the cardiologist was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We are short 3 trauma-experienced nurses in this hospital and have been for a year. We cannot recruit them out here. They go to the cities." He took a card from his coat and wrote a name and a number on the back of it. "I am not promising you anything I cannot deliver. What I am telling you is that the woman who walked in here tonight is exactly the person this hospital has been unable to hire, and I would consider it a personal favor if you would call this number on Monday and let me make a phone call before you do." He pressed the card into her hand the way Walt had pressed the T, and she closed her fingers on it. That should have been the end. A heart attack survived, a job appearing out of the wreckage of a lost one. There was still Garrett Pruitt. And a thing about men like Garrett is that they cannot let a story be simple, because here is what Garrett did, and here is why it matters that an antagonist with foresight protects what he builds. When the 911 call had come in, the volunteer fire department's first response rig, the one Garrett ran, was 11 minutes out, which is why the county ambulance had come instead. Garrett had heard the call on the scanner, the way he heard every call, and Garrett had driven out to the Bricker farm anyway, arriving after the ambulance left, and Garrett had looked at the situation, an old man taken to the hospital, and a strange black woman who had been in his kitchen. And Garrett had reached the conclusion that a certain kind of man always reaches. He had gone into the kitchen and found Walt's wallet on the counter where it always sat, and Walt's grocery money in it. And he had decided in a way that let him keep believing. He was a good man doing his duty that the wallet should be secured as evidence, because you never knew with strangers what had really happened in that house. He took the wallet. He told himself he was protecting an old man. And he made one phone call that Sunday night to a friend who worked dispatch. And he said the kind of thing such men say, that there had been an incident at the Bricker place, that an out-of-town woman had been alone with a vulnerable elderly man, that it might be worth a welfare check and a few questions, that these things were often not what they appeared. He planted it carefully. He built it so that if Walt died on the table, there would already be a question hanging over the woman who had been with him. He protected his version of the story before anyone could tell a different one. Simone learned all of this on Monday morning when a sheriff's deputy who was not Garrett came to her grandmother's house, where she had spent the night fixing nothing and worrying about everything, and asked her to come answer some questions about the events at the Bricker farm. He was polite. He was apologetic, even. He had been sent, though, and the thing that had sent him was Garrett Pruitt's careful Sunday night phone call, and Simone sat in a small room at the county building and felt all those years of being a problem to be filed settle over her like the cold off the cornfields. She did not panic. She had not panicked on the kitchen floor, and she did not panic now. She answered every question in complete, calm, specific language, the language of a person who has handed off 100 patients, and at the end of it the deputy said, almost gently, "There's a matter of Mr. Bricker's wallet. You understand, we have to ask." And that was the moment the whole thing could have turned, because there is no defense against a missing wallet except the truth, and the truth is invisible, and a black woman alone in an old white man's kitchen does not get the benefit of an invisible truth in most rooms in this country. Simone knew that. She had always known that. She said, "I never touched his wallet. The last time I saw it, it was on the kitchen counter by the bread box. You should ask the people who were in that kitchen after I left it, because I left it in an ambulance with a man whose heart had stopped. And I have not been back. It was Eli who broke it open. Not Simone, and not a lawyer, and not a kindly white official who swept in to save her. A 9-year-old boy who came out into the cold with a flashlight. Because Eli had been at the hospital all that day, sitting with his grandfather, who had woken up groggy and grey but alive and asking for the woman who saved him, and when Walt was strong enough to talk, Eli had told him everything, including the part the boy had seen through the kitchen window on Sunday evening. While Simone was already gone to the hospital in the ambulance, Eli had seen Garrett Pruitt's truck come up the drive. Eli had told his mother, who had finally arrived from the distribution center, white-faced, and his mother had told the nurse, and the nurse had told the cardiologist. And the cardiologist, who had a card with his number in Simone's pocket, made a phone call he had not planned to make, because the cardiologist remembered something. When Walt had come in, the paramedics had bagged his personal effects per protocol, the way they always do, an inventory taken and signed, and the inventory had a line on it, and the line said, "Wallet, brown leather, contents not counted, removed from patient's residence by first responder G. Pruitt, transferred to county property." It was documented. Garrett, who had spent his whole career certain that his word was the only record that mattered in Harlow Bend, had forgotten that the modern world writes things down. He had signed for the wallet himself, in his own hand, on a county form, because taking it had felt like authority and signing for it had felt like duty, and he had not imagined that the form would ever be read by anyone who would hold it against him. The deputy questioning Simone got a call in the middle of it. He stepped out. When he came back, his whole posture had changed. The way a person changes when the ground they were standing on turns out to belong to someone else. He said, "Mrs. Okafor, I owe you an apology. The wallet's accounted for. It was logged into county property by another officer. I'm sorry you were brought in here." And he meant it, and it was not enough. And they both knew it was not enough. But it was the truth finally made visible, and that was something. Walt Bricker came home 8 days later with a stent in his chest and a new set of orange pill bottles and an old man's fury at having been frightened. And the first thing he did before he even sat down was drive himself against medical advice, with Eli buckled in beside him and Simone following in the Honda, because she did not trust him at the wheel, to the county building, and he walked in on legs that still shook, and he asked, in a voice that carried, to see whoever was in charge of Garrett Pruitt. What happened in Harlow Bend over the following weeks was not a courtroom and not a spectacle, because that is not how consequence usually arrives in a small town. It arrived quietly, and it arrived completely. Walt Bricker had farmed beside these people for 50 years. He had loaned them equipment and pulled their trucks out of ditches and sat with them at funerals, and when a man like that stands in the county building and tells the plain story of what a deputy did, the story travels, and it does not need to shout. The sheriff, an elected man who had to face 400 people at the feed store every week, did the math that elected men do. Garrett Pruitt had taken a sick man's wallet without cause, signed for it, and used a fabricated suspicion to send the law after the woman who had saved that sick man's life. There was a county form with his signature on it. There was a paramedic's inventory. There was a 9-year-old who had seen the truck. The record was complete, and the record had been built, every bit of it, by Garrett's own certainty that he would never have to answer for any of it. He resigned the reserve deputy commission before they could take it. He kept the hardware store because a man has to eat, but the volunteer fire department voted, quietly, at their next monthly meeting to remove him from the first response rotation, and the vote was not close. The man who had decided who got help on County Road 9 was no longer trusted to decide who got help anywhere. He became, in the precise and bloodless arithmetic of a small town, a man people were polite to and did not turn to. Invisible in exactly the way he had tried to make Simone, nobody had to crow about it. The silence did the work. None of it ended on Garrett Pruitt, because he was never the point. The point was the woman in the dead car and the boy with the flashlight and what gets recognized when the world finally stops blocking the door. Simone called the number on the cardiologist's card. She got the job not as a favor, the cardiologist was careful to make sure of that, but after an interview where the trauma director listened to her describe a night at the Bricker farm and a teenager's femoral artery held closed for 19 minutes and a helicopter floor tilting under a bleeding body, and the trauma director, a woman near retirement who had seen everything, said at the end of it, "I have hired 40 nurses in this chair. I have never once been able to hire one I was more certain of." She did not say it to flatter. She said it the way you state a fact, and, Simone heard, underneath it, the thing she had needed to hear for 3 days and 11 years, that her competence was not invisible, that it had simply been in rooms that refused to look. She fixed the porch first. She had promised herself she would, and she did, on her days off, with Walt supervising from a lawn chair against doctor's orders, and Eli handing her nails one at a time and narrating. The porch was sound by the end of the month. The roof took longer. The garden came back in the spring. And on a warm evening in May, the town of Harlow Bend held its annual Volunteer Awards supper in the fire station. The kind of event a place like that takes seriously. Folding tables and casserole dishes and a microphone that squealed, and Walt Bricker, fully recovered, stood up at that microphone with his grandson beside him. And he did the thing that the niche of this town does instead of a boardroom. He told 400 neighbors that he was alive because of the woman sitting at the end of the third table, and he told them how, in plain words, the grey colour and the kitchen floor and the 11 minutes and the boy on the phone, and he asked the fire department to do something they had never done for someone who was not a member. They gave Simone a citation, a small thing, a framed certificate, and a brass medallion on a ribbon, the Volunteer Department's award for civilian life-saving, and the chief read out the words, and the words named what she had done, out loud, in front of the whole town that had once driven past her in the dark. Simone stood up to receive it, and she did not make a speech because that was not who she was. She simply said thank you, and she looked for one face in the crowd, and she found it. A 9-year-old in his good shirt with his hair combed flat with water, and she held the medallion up so he could see it because they both knew whose it really was. "Because here is the thing," she said to him later. On Walt's porch, with the walnut trees going dark against the last of the light, the world had looked at her in a dead car at 2 in the morning and decided she was a risk to be passed. 8 cars, then a deputy, then a spreadsheet, before all of it. And a boy who could not yet drive, who knew nothing about her, who had every reason a child is taught to fear a stranger in the dark, had come out into 19 degrees with a flashlight in both hands and lit the ground in front of her feet so she would not stumble. "You want to know what saved your grandpa," she told Eli. "It wasn't me. I just knew what to do with my hands. What saved him is that one time, a long time before he ever needed it, somebody decided to stop being scared and go see about a person in the dark. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. The hands are just hands. Somebody has to go look first." Eli thought about that the way he thought about everything, seriously, turning it over. Then he said, "Grandpa was right." Then about scared people being no good to anybody. "Your grandpa's right about almost everything," she said. "Don't tell him I said so." Walt heard it anyway from his lawn chair, and he laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough, and Eli was up and at his side before the cough finished, a hand on the old man's back, and Simone watched the boy, who had learned in one cold winter what it cost to go see about a person, and she thought he would be the kind of man who stops on a dark road. There were not enough of them. There would be one more. She kept the medallion in the kitchen of her grandmother's house, not on a wall but in a drawer, with the cardiologist's card and a flashlight she bought, a heavy black one with a handle, the kind you keep by a back door for emergencies. She did not need it for the dark. She had lights in every room now. She kept it because it reminded her of the only thing she had learned that was worth keeping from the worst week of her life, which was that the measure of a person is not whether they have a warm car and somewhere to be. It is whether, when they see a light moving in a frozen field at 2 in the morning, they go and see about it. She went to work in the trauma bay 3 nights a week, and she was the steady one again, the nurse the residents looked at when a code went sideways, and the hospital that hired her wrote her competence down in a column on a form where it had always belonged, and she did the work she had been built to do. And on her drive home down the unlit county roads, she watched the shoulders. And twice that first year she stopped for stranded cars and rolled down her window and asked if they needed help, and lit the ground in front of their feet with a heavy black flashlight she kept on the passenger seat, where the cardboard box used to be. The box was unpacked by then. 11 years had found their places in a sound house with a fixed porch, and on the porch in the evenings, an old man and a boy and a woman who had once been stranded sat and shelled walnuts into a steel bowl and watched the dark come down over a country that had passed her by, and then, because of a child and a flashlight, had not.